We have a plan.
All right, well, slight change of plans.
We think we know what we're doing.
I think if we modify this entire space, then we're going to be able to have a proper pilot berth.
We're not like 110% sure on exactly the measurements.
Yeah, we just cut a hole in a watertight bulkhead, which I guess could be an issue.
Speaking of holes in bulkheads, this is the pilot berth, and then you can like lay down, and then this is gonna be our own watch.
There's an Arcona that's sunk.
Its rudder post broke.
What?
Yeah, and it just goes.
Oh my gosh.
Over the years, we've always loved having friends over, but there's two problems. One, whenever we had a friend over, they would have to sleep into the nook, which is fine, but then they don't really have a lot of privacy. And so we've always wanted to have like a space that we could dedicate for our friends to come and sleep.
Or you could sleep in the mainsail.
But the second problem we've had is like, when we go out on a long passage, the only place that we could really sleep was the settee. Technically, the boat had a pilot berth, but it was so small and you felt claustrophobic when you're in there because there's no space to move at all, and we never ended up liking to sleep there. So we ended up shoving stuff in the back of it, and we used it as like a chair basically when we're on watch. I think if we modify this entire space, then we're going to be able to have a proper pilot berth so that at sea we can properly sleep in a protected area, but with enough space that we can actually move around a little bit if we need to. So that's what this space is gonna be. But we're going to need to cut a hole into the bulkhead, because when we installed this bulkhead, we wanted it to be a full, completely enclosed, and then so we can figure out where we wanted the holes, exactly where we wanted them, based on the design that we have. So now that we know exactly where the holes are, we're going to cut it perfectly to the size of the pilot berth, and then this whole space is gonna be a nice little guest room. And then on the other side, there's gonna be the U-shaped galley. We already have one part of the counter space, and then we're gonna build, it's gonna be part of the same system. We're gonna build a bulkhead here, which is gonna be the second counter space, and then eventually we'll build that, which is gonna be the storage and where the stove is gonna be, etc. But that is a plan, and like everything, it sounds like it's just like two small spaces, but it's gonna take a week to get probably half of it done. So we'll see how far we go. Also, one other thing that we can mention is that underneath this beautiful plastic bucket is our electric motor. Da, 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 da. The challenge that we're going to have with building this section is going to be to properly build around and over the electric motor, because we want to have it in sort of a watertight compartment, so that if something does leak, then water doesn't suddenly just like flood into the entire cabin. It will have some space and gives us some time to assess the problem. So that's gonna be a fun challenge. But I think we've got something, we've got the solution for it, and now it's time to build. But before we can build anything in here, we have to clean up and make some space.
Space.
Like here. And we're gonna use that.
Yeah, we're gonna be using that first, and then we're gonna be using that. It's like reverse Tetris.
Yeah.
All right, so what we're going to be building are these. The ones in red. We're kind of modeling as we go and turning the ones we've done brown and the ones we're going to be working on next red. And yeah, so it's this whole galley cockpit companionway section is what we're working on next. But since there's the toe kick is what's going to get aligned to the rib, so the bulkhead is actually going to be offset by 10 centimeters forward. But it means where I'm standing here is going to be galley. It's going to be the stove, countertop, storage. Yeah. It's time to measure and mark and get the laser out and get everything lined up. It's probably going to be like a whole day of just lining up stuff. So the whole measure twice, cut once thing on a boat, I feel like it's measure 100 times and cut once, cut twice. Cut once small and then cut a second time to the right size. That's our philosophy. No, hey. I don't think we need steps. I think we just do that every time. Cut it a second time, like to the actual dimension once we kind of build up some more of these bulkheads. We have a plan. We have measured everything. We think we know what we're doing. We've adjusted the design a little bit based on new measurements and ideas, and we're definitely putting a pilot berth in here. But we're not like 110% sure on exactly the measurements, so we're not gonna cut the full size of the opening just yet. We're just gonna cut like an access hatch port sort of out of the middle so we can kind of see into the cockpit. We can take measurements, we can use a laser, we can align things. Probably glass a few more bulkheads in this week, and then once all those are glassed in, then we'll come back and kind of cut the final dimension in, because this is a glassed in bulkhead and we don't want to cut the hole too big. So we're gonna cut it too small first.
Solid plan.
Solid plan. A little bit of water in there, hey?
Oh, damn, I didn't even see that.
You want to go poke a stick through our little bleed hole?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
All right, here we go. Ugh.
We have like access into the cockpit now.
Secret door to the back.
This is our aft cabin. It's very small. It's Kika size. No, so yeah, we just cut a hole in a watertight bulkhead, which I guess could be an issue.
Why could it be an issue?
We moved this cockpit bulkhead back by about a foot, so it lines up with the front edge of our cockpit like basin. Partially so we have more space inside, but also because it's stronger, it lines up with the traveler, so it's all going to be like a stronger place to put a bulkhead. Also, our scupper drains can go right down the front of it and kind of be glassed to it, so that we're going to have like a fiberglass pipe coming up above the water line so that it can't leak. But the main goal of this bulkhead was to separate the cockpit locker lids, those two cockpit drains, and our rudder post, all 5 of those holes that have the potential to have a lot of water coming into them really quickly, to separate that from the inside of the boat, so that if any of those ever leak, it's not going to like flood the inside of our boat. We don't want to sink like that Arcona did.
There's an Arcona that sunk?
Did you not see the video?
No.
Its rudder post broke,
What?
and then it ripped a hole in the bottom of the boat, and then it sunk. Because obviously, like bilge pumps can't keep up with like a huge hole in the bottom of the boat.
Oh my god, it's sinking.
The people were fine though. Like they got on their life raft, and they were part of like the Ark or something like that. So they
So they had people around.
yeah, there was other boats around, so they got picked up pretty quickly. Yeah, and it just goes.
Oh my gosh.
What? So, why did it sink?
It's an aluminum rudder post, which is already weird because
And ours is
they
not
snap.
aluminum.
Ours is stainless steel, so it'll bend. I mean, it's never going to.
I
This is a good learning
I
opportunity.
think this is. I think we need to get somewhere and actually explain what's happening here because this is kind of. This is
This
insane.
is a good learning opportunity, and this
Let's
is
see.
explaining our point perfectly why we are putting watertight bulkheads in our boat and compartmentalizing all of the different holes that could leak, and why that's important for offshore sailing. We're in a shipyard. Let's go get some visual aids and explain this. Yeah, let's do that. Learning opportunity. Let's go find some rudders. In order to explain this, bear with me, we're gonna have to do like a little bit of how boats work and the differences between rudders so that this all makes sense. There's sort of two different types of rudders in the world. There's skeg hung, which is ours. This is a skeg, so it's fiberglass to our hull. And then our rudder is hung off the back of it. So there's a big metal cap down here, and running right up here is our rudder post. It goes up inside the boat. So it has two fixed points on either side, which makes it super, super strong. And in order for our rudder to fall off or get damaged, like this whole skeg has to get ripped off, which means we've got bigger problems because like we could hit rocks with this and it still wouldn't rip off our boat. It's very strong. So skeg hung rudders are definitely the most durable. Some boats with like full keels, like the rudders hung off the back of the keel, that's also skeg hung. And then you can have rudders that are hung off the back of a boat. I don't really know what they're called, but they're on like pins and lintels or something like that. That's pretty old school with the tiller. Those are also basically skeg hung. It's attached solidly to the boat. The downside with these is that the pivot point is right here at the front. So as you're steering and the water is pushing on this aft section of the rudder, it takes a lot of force to keep the rudder over, so hand steering is difficult. As opposed to more modern designs, which we're in a shipyard, so we could probably go find one.
What about this guy? What do you think? What kind of rudder do you think he
he's
has?
got basically a skeg hung rudder. Yes, this is the kind of rudder I was talking about. It's hung off the back of the whole hull, so there's no hull penetrations at all. It's connected to the bottom, it's connected to the top, but that's like a bomb-proof rudder. There's nothing that can go wrong. If this boat hits something, the keel's gonna hit, this huge chunk of metal's gonna hit. The rudder's metal anyway, so like that's not gonna go anywhere. They're never gonna lose steering. But steering, especially at high speeds, requires so much force. You have to have a super long tiller to get that kind of leverage. Let's see if we can find a modern one. So this is a Dufour, but it's a pretty typical like modern production boat. Big wide boat, fin keel with a bulb, and a spade hung rudder. This is the other type of rudder. This is what's called a spade rudder, and it has no support from here to here. The rudder shaft kind of comes down a little bit back from the front, but when you turn the helm, the pivot point is set back from the leading edge of the rudder. And so this leading edge actually provides some assistance. So as you're steering, the further over you steer, the more water pushes on that leading edge, which helps you like turn the rudder into the water. And so it's called a balanced helm. Theoretically, if it's designed properly for the boat and the rig and the weight and everything, it really does feel balanced. It makes hand steering almost feel hydraulic. It's very easy, and you can still feel the boat, and you can feel the water going by the rudder. The big disadvantage with these is that you have this huge exposed rudder, and the only thing supporting it is the main bearing, which is like right here in the hull. And then up near the deck, there's another bracket that holds the top edge. So it still has 2 points of connection, but if you hit something with this, it's gonna break or snap off. Some of them have like a weak point built in, so like the bottom will snap off, you can still steer. But what happened with the Arcona is that up there by the quadrant, the aluminum rudder stock snapped, and so it no longer had 2 points of contact with the hull, it just had one. So this huge piece of fiberglass started swinging and banging back and forth, and it ripped a hole all around here, which obviously caused the boat to sink. The rudder stock breaking didn't cause the boat to sink. Water flooding into the boat caused the boat to sink. I know that sounds really stupid, and it sounds really like obvious and duh, but here's the point I'm trying to make. On our boat, with the skeg hung rudder, our bearing is above the water line. So even if the bearing leaked and that the gland, the seal, even if that like failed, our boat wouldn't sink because there wouldn't be water coming into it. And this is why it's such a good example, because the Arcona, the thing it was missing is a watertight bulkhead here. If you have a watertight bulkhead between your rudder and the bilge,
then if you lose your rudder or your rudder gets damaged, the boat won't sink. It'll just flood the back lazarette. Yeah, you'll probably have to get towed in, or you have to jerry rig a rudder, or only sail downwind till you get to help. Like, it's gonna be an emergency situation, but you're not gonna lose your boat.
Didn't the Salona
Yes.
have the same sort of issue, but it didn't
This
sink?
is why, this is sort of our point, because we also have experience with a boat that lost its rudder in a very similar way, and it didn't sink. Do you guys remember the Salona that we sailed on like
3 years ago.
3 years ago? The Salona 460, same size as the Arcona. Some people would argue very similar to an Arcona, like higher performance, modern design, cruiser racer kind of boat. That boat that we sailed on was getting delivered to North America. And in order to do so, the owner opted to ship it rather than sail it or get a delivery crew to sail it. And so they took the mast off, they took the keel off, and they took the rudder off because its rudders are quite big. And they shipped it over, and then when it arrived on the East Coast somewhere, I think it was up near like Boston or Maine or something, they reassembled the boat. They put the mast back on, they put the keel back on, they put the rudder back on. And so that bottom bearing is big, it's huge, and it's glassed into the hull, and that takes most of the force. But the upper end of the rudder stock has like a bracket that attaches to the deck. That's where the emergency tiller gets attached. And the contractors who are putting the rudder back in didn't attach that bracket properly, or didn't put a cotter pin or something in it. I'm not sure exactly the details, but the delivery skipper who picked the boat up took it offshore. That bracket came loose, so the whole rudder slid down. And so it was basically the same thing. It was only connected to this lower bearing. And so of course it like wobbled back and forth and immediately like snapped and ripped the whole thing apart. And it caused a huge hole in the back of the boat. But the difference is Salonas have a watertight bulkhead here. And so 20 liters of water, 30 liters of water made it into the lazarette, hardly anything. They strapped the rudder up behind the boat. They called for help. They got towed in. They hauled the boat out. They glassed it all back in again and then kept on sailing, and they didn't lose the boat. I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, all of these boats, all these new production boats, they're all rated as like Class A ocean going, and there's tons of people that sail them around the world, and 99.99% of the time, nothing bad happens. But it's one of those things where if something bad happens, there are ways to mitigate the risk. And in our opinion, like if you're gonna call yourself a blue water boat, you need to compartmentalize water ingress points so that you're not kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. You're not sort of relying on one bilge with one bilge pump. So if your boat has one bilge and one bilge pump to rule all of the through hulls and all of the hatches and all of the cockpit and all of the crash and the bow thruster and the keel bolts and the rudder and the cockpit and the sail drive, if all of those holes are protected by one bilge pump, or even a bilge pump and a backup bilge pump, you're kind of like running the risk of losing your boat much higher than if you sort of compartmentalize it so that you have like a crash bulkhead in the front, segment off your sail drive and your rudder. So if any of those things leak, your boat's still gonna float and you're still gonna sail.
Do you think this boat has a watertight bulkhead?
I highly doubt it. So we don't know every boat manufacturer and every production boat, but it'd be interesting if you have a boat, comment down below and let us know what boat it is and if it has more than one watertight compartment in it. We'd love to know, because we don't. I mean, we've sailed on some production boats, we haven't sailed on all production boats, but I would say the majority of them don't. But it's kind of a really easy solution to implement, because most of these production boats, if we back up a little bit, they all have the same layout. They're all like aft cockpit, twin helm, and then somewhere about in the middle, you go down into the saloon, and then the middle section's the saloon with a head. You've got two aft cabins and a V-berth with a head, maybe a head in the middle. They're all like 3 cabin, 2 head layouts. And so right at the end of this aft cabin, there's a bulkhead there anyway, and it goes across, and it's usually in front of the rudder anyway. The difference is it takes a little bit of extra glass, a little bit of extra work, a little bit of extra like care when you're running hoses and cables and stuff through that bulkhead to make sure they're sealed. But it's the difference between losing your boat and not losing your boat, especially if you have a spade hung rudder. It's just really not an issue with skeg hung rudders to like lose your rudder. But if one little pin fails on that and the rudder falls down, your boat sinks. If you have an aluminum rudder shaft and you've sailed more than 30,000 miles, the metal fatigue can just snap, because with aluminum, it just snaps, it doesn't bend. It almost seems reckless to not have a watertight bulkhead in front of a spade hung rudder. That's my theory.
Yeah.
That's my rant.
That's your rant. On that note,
All right.
let's go back to the boat.
So let's go back to our boat, and we'll explain where we're putting watertight compartments and why.
So a little digression, these charter catamarans keep hitting rocks, and so like every week there's another one coming in with a big chunk missing out of their keel. So this is a Bali, I think. These keels aren't like structural members of the hull. I don't think they can put weight on these because it's just like hollow fiberglass. And so when they hit something, it just completely shreds it, and they rebuild it, and like in a week it'll go back in the water and they'll hit another rock, and then it'll be back out in a week.
But this is crazy.
It's completely
Look at
empty.
this.
Like there's it's not even that thick of glass. And then it's just like glued and bolted on the bottom of the boat. So we're not boat builders. We don't run a shipyard. But I think why companies like Arcona and pretty much all the catamarans use aluminum rudder stocks is because they are lighter. So that makes the whole boat lighter, so it's like higher performance. The difference is on a catamaran like this one, or even this is kind of similar to like any monohull with twin rudders as well. These rudders are much smaller, so they have like much less leverage, so you can build them cheaper. So that's why most modern production boats that have twin rudders, it's just because they can make them cheaper because they don't have to build them as strong. But I'm pretty sure that that's going to have an aluminum rudder post in it as well. But the other advantage to some catamarans, I'm not going to say all, but quite a few, the engines are in the back and the rudders are in the back, and then they usually have like a fire bulkhead or some sort of watertight sealed bulkhead. So like if the rudder ever leaks or if the sail drive ever leaks, it's going to flood that engine compartment, but it's not going to flood the whole boat. So they tend to be a little bit better segmented off than monohulls are anyway. And then forward, they usually have like a crash bulkhead too. So another like super basic fundamental principle of sailboats is that they're just big, empty buckets, and the heavier they are, the more they push down into the water. And at some point, there's a balance point between like the displacement of the boat and how much water it's displacing. This is super basic stuff. Our boat, that line is somewhere around here. So that's our water line. Everything below this is underwater while we're sailing. So any holes above this, if you spring a leak, if water gets in, it's not the end of the world, because if you stop the boat from sailing, water's not going to come inside. Any holes below the water line, you need to pay particular attention to, because those have the potential to sink your boat. Because if you get a leak in one of those and you can't stop it, the boat's going to sink. Because the more water that goes in, the more the boat's going to get displaced, and it's going to compound that issue. Typically, down in the keel somewhere on the bottom of a boat is a big pump, and it's called a bilge pump, because this whole area underneath the cabin sole, like the floor of the boat, is called a bilge. That pump is usually supposed to be like a maintenance pump, like if you left a hatch open when it's raining, or like on our boat when the chain locker used to not be sealed, if we would get waves over the bow, some water would get down and trickle into the bilge. So every time we were sailing offshore, every 4 hours or so, the bilge pump would go off, because there's just water sometimes gets into a boat. The theory on most boats is that there's one bilge and one bilge pump. So any water that comes in from any little hole anywhere on the boat all makes it down into the middle section somewhere at the lowest point, and it all collects down there and the pump takes it out. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's kind of less maintenance because you only have one bilge pump, and that's the way pretty much all boats that I know of are handled. I mean, catamarans are separate, they have two hulls. Some boats will have a separate bilge pump in the engine compartment, but normally the bilge pumps are placed at like the lowest points. And so if there's a low point in the engine compartment, it needs its own bilge pump. If there's a low point in the bilge, it needs its own bilge pump. They're usually not placed behind like watertight compartments. Even if you have a regular maintenance bilge pump, a lot of offshore boats and a lot of people going around the world will have some big, massive like emergency bilge pump and usually a manual bilge pump. So they'll have 2 or 3 or even like a manual or a bucket, but it's still one bilge. And so if you get one hole somewhere, if you can't stop that one hole from leaking, it will eventually sink your boat. And so our theory with our rebuild is that the chain locker is going to be separated, which is about here, because that has a windlass in it, and the windlass hole gets water over when we're going through waves or waves are crashing over. And then, but we can put a floor in it above the water line, so it's going to self-drain. And then back about here, we have a watertight bulkhead underneath the V-berth mattress. And so we're gonna call that one a collision bulkhead, because if you're gonna hit something, you're probably gonna hit it with the bow. If you're gonna, like a container or a log, if it's gonna put a hole somewhere in there, then just this front section of the boat is gonna get a bit of water in it. It will fill up to the water line and a little bit more, but because the whole rest of the boat's gonna be dry, it's not gonna sink the boat. Then in the middle, from that bulkhead all the way to about here, that's going to be taken care of by our main bilge. The only perforations in our hull that are going to be in that section is the keel and the keel bolts, which is like the least likely thing to fail. But we're not going to have any through hulls. We're not going to have any water intakes there. All of those are going to be on the other side of watertight bulkheads. We're then going to put one about here, which is going to separate off the sail drive where the ocean vault is. Again, these are like super unlikely things to happen, but that sail drive is a big hole. And if that ever leaks for some reason, it would sink our boat faster than we could probably even react to it. So we're actually going to segment off and compartmentalize just the ocean vault in a little watertight box with a hatch on it. So if it leaks, it's going to have like 30 liters of water that's going to come into the boat, and that's it. And then behind the ocean vault now is where we moved the cockpit bulkhead, which means everything after that is going to be protected by that bulkhead. So the rudder stock, the cockpit lockers, we have 3 cockpit lids, and so we're going to be making those watertight, but also they can pop open, especially if you're upside down and something falls on it and it can pop open. That's a lot of water coming in your boat very quickly. And that's going to be protected by that back bulkhead, which means, again, like, you know, there will be a significant amount of water in the back of the boat. We will notice a difference, but the boat won't sink. So that's why we're compartmentalizing and segmenting off our boat. We are going to have to put multiple bilge pumps in, but also it means that we can put multiple bilge pump alarms. And so we can tell where a leak is coming from based on what bilge pump's going off, which I think is better because then you have a better understanding of like where you need to look for a problem, rather than, it's happened before to us where we're like, the bilge pump's going off. There's a lot of water in the bilge. Where is it coming from? And we don't know, and you have to kind of like open up all the floorboards and trace the leak back and try to figure out where it's coming from. Our boat had a single bilge and a single bilge pump with a manual backup for the last 10 years. And again, the majority of boats out there do. We're just saying that if you're going to be building a boat or if you're building a new boat, there's some really easy design choices you can make to make a boat significantly safer and to make a boat have significantly less potential to sink. And since we've ripped everything out of the inside of our boat, we have the potential to make those changes. And I know that we're both going to sleep a lot better at night knowing that like one little hole in our boat isn't gonna make it sink, because this is probably a story for another time. A rat almost sank our boat once. So we'll get into that when we get into through hulls. But that's why we're doing watertight compartments. The V-berth one's already done. The cockpit bulkhead's already done. So we're gonna crawl back in and start laminating the box that's gonna go around our ocean vault, because then all the major watertight stuff is gonna be done and we can start doing the rest of the bulkheads.
Right. Let's get back to it.
Rant complete.
All right, well, slight change of plans. Well, not really change of plans, but slight alteration of the current plan.
We had a discussion.
We had a discussion, and before we can cut more bulkheads or cut a bigger hole or make the pilot berth, we're going to remove the companionway.
This trim that you guys have been like begging us to varnish for 10 years, and we were like, we're never varnishing that trim. If we ever have the time and freedom to varnish that trim, you know that like all hell's broken loose, because it means that we've done everything else that's possibly to do on a boat. Because we climb in and out all the time. We're gonna like destroy the varnish.
It was never a priority, and besides, we would have never, I feel like we would have never varnished it or sanded it ever. So we're still not going to.
We've always had plans of rebuilding our companionway because it sucks. It's 3 different procedures to get out, and then you have to store the board somewhere. It's just a pain in the butt. It's such a weird design, but like so many sailboats have the exact same design.
It sucks.
And it's always bugged us.
We've come to the conclusion that we're going to build a different one.
Yeah, we're gonna custom build something better.
We're not going to build it now.
No.
But part of building it is taking it off. So
Yeah.
we're going to take it off, finish the bulkheads,
We're gonna
and then build a new one.
take this trim off and then take this like interior, this last little piece of hull liner off. And then it connects to the deck behind here, so there's not gonna be a connection. It's not glassed together, and then we can rip that off. And they'll have like a clean slate to measure and mark what we need to, so we can start putting bulkheads back in.
So it's all part of the same system.
Yeah.
But this needs to happen.
They're also the last flathead screws that exist on this sailboat. And they are, technically not true, there's some on the bow, but we're not putting any flathead screws back on. Everything's gonna be Torx. So I'm excited to get rid of these. Why did it come out in one piece? It's annoying. Now what? These demo
Right.
projects are getting easier and easier. Yep.
You want to get out and I'll pass it to you.
Easy peasy.
Come on.
Too tired.
Maybe I shouldn't be in
Exercise
the
too
way
much.
of your feet. I feel like we should probably remove that board.
Too many push-ups this morning. All right.
Yeah, fits perfectly. All right.
It's
Let's
a pizza.
cut the bulkhead. I'll have to get out too. There we are. Let's see if it fits. Is that the smallest bulkhead? Oh yeah. Perfect. 2 down, 1 to go. For
good.
this part.
Glassing to the actual hull. Got like, we'll call it 24. 25 with the head. We'll call it 25. And we've done 7. It's a long process. All right.
Let's get to it.
Snap to it. So we have finished glassing in most of the bulkheads around the ocean pole. So this is the cockpit bulkhead, and it's already watertight down here. And then this is going to be sort of the side of our companionway, separating this from the pilot berth. This is the back edge of the galley. This lower one is basically the toe kick underneath the galley. And then this is all going to be like refrigerator and covered space and stuff behind me. What's still missing is like the lid that's going to get glassed down on top of this. And we're going to make it and seal it and glass it.
underneath, and then underneath the companionway steps, we're going to have a big hatch right here. So if we need to, we need to service the Ocean Vault or change the oil, or if we need to remove it, we'll be able to like remove it out through that hatch, which I don't ever really foresee doing, but it's nice to know we can still take it out.
Oh, it's gonna be like one of those.
It's gonna be like a race boat.
Yeah, the thing that I can think of, it's gonna be like the hatch in the race boats.
Yeah.
The race boats have that too.
Race boats have tons of watertight separations because those boats hit things and flip over and get damaged all the time. They usually have those hatches so you can see the prop and they can see like bearings and the drive and everything. So this little box that I'm sitting in right now, you know, if for some reason this thing starts leaking or gets damaged or rips off, whatever the reason, it's only going to fill up with this much water, which is like negligible this is probably 50 liters of water or something. So that's going to get finished off. And then all this has been glassed on the side, so this whole area is going to be watertight. One of the things that we're probably going to do, we haven't fully formed out the idea yet though, is between each of these bulkheads, from the V-berth and this one and the sail drive one, we're probably going to have like a threaded manual like drain plug, I guess, in case for some reason, I don't know, the bilge pump fails or for maintenance or for rinsing out the boat or something, we'll be able to just sort of like unthread a plug, and then the water behind here can drain into the regular bilge and get pumped out with a regular bilge pump. Or maybe it's a manual backup thing and that we only have one manual pump and that's for the main bilge and we've lost all of our electronics. So we want, and maybe something's leaked in here, we have water in here. Once we fix the leak, we can manually drain that into the main bilge and then pump it out. I don't know. It's a thought that we're sort of currently fleshing out. I also like bogged in and glassed in a nice flat surface here. So any water that comes in here is going to drain down to this flat surface. This is the lowest point. So this is where our bilge pump's going to be. And then the only things coming out of here are going to be 2 data cables for the Ocean Vault, 3 power cables for the Ocean Vault, and the bilge pump. So they'll come out back here somewhere, and each one of those will be watertight, sealed. Like I said, it is more work to make watertight compartments. We have the opportunity to do it, and it's going to make us sleep better at night, knowing that our boat has been segmented and we're not relying on one bilge pump to save our lives and save our boat.
Speaking of holes in bulkheads and stuff, so this is our aft cabin. As you can see, it's very wide. This is the pallet berth. You can only sleep.
It's very secure.
Yeah, absolutely. We can have like a hatch here. You can only sleep this direction, you know, maybe.
Like a sitting up position.
Like this. And then you can like lay down. And then this is going to be our own watch. I'm totally kidding, by the way. No, I know this looks very, very small, but now that we have that, we'll cut it wide to the size that we need. And we'll also cut this wider to the size of the berth. But it's going to go all the way back to the rudder post and then sealed into the hull. So there's going to be no openings after we're done with the space. So it's going to be just like a beautiful berth, kind of like what we had before, only it's going to be part of the boat, not necessarily just like a random thing that they added into the design, you know?
Yeah.
As you can see, we have a lot of work to do, but we're going to pause on the pallet berth for now, and then the next thing on the list is going to be to attack the main cabin area. So we're going to work on the nook, we're going to work on maybe the head next week, and then we'll come back to doing the cockpit lockers, and part of the cockpit lockers will be to finish the pallet berth. But I'm gonna crawl out of here, and we'll see you guys next week. So,
you can just climb straight out.
I can just climb straight out. We don't need steps on this boat, right? We can just like,
climbers.
This is gonna be a boat for strong people.
All right.
Bye.